So I'm Martin Haley. Up until the acquisition, I was the CEO of a business called Red Whale. And Red Whale is one of the leading providers of medical education to GPs and clinicians within primary care. We founded the business in 2007, and it had always been our objective to exit at some point. But what happened was that we did receive an approach for the business, and at that point we thought, yeah, this is now the right time really for us to think about exiting. And that is when we engaged Kingsbrook to help us through that process. So I'm a marketing man at heart, and I'd never really liked the valuation system that accountants would use that would simply be a multiple. I'd always thought there's got to be a specific value to any business to a specific buyer, and that's something that very much is the Kingsbrook approach. So in terms of valuing the business on a multiple, we looked at what is this business going to be worth to specific buyers to save them, for example, having to invest in building this business from scratch. And so that was something that was very attractive to us. We had an idea as to what the business would be worth, a range, but we let the market decide, and the market did. With the organisations that made offers, the one we ran with was towards the top end of that range. For us, it was not just about the price. We wanted a buyer who would, in our terms, curate the business, because we felt what we had was something special, and that something special was what made the end offering unique. And we were very, very comfortable with the organisation who did acquire the business, but what was really important is that Kingsbrook took that on board as well, that they really understood what it was we were looking for in a buyer rather than just a price. At the outset of the project, when we were putting together some forecasts and budgets, Kingsbrook were incredibly helpful in helping us understand what has to go in the long term and what doesn't. So, for example, costs related to us as owners wouldn't go in the same way as they did as part of us being owners of the business. And we found that very useful as well, because that gave us really, really good firm budgets that we could present with confidence to potential buyers. Before every meeting with a potential buyer, I was incredibly well briefed by Kingsbrook, because they'd done a lot of the background work into these organisations, which also meant that during the meetings, if any questions which I felt were a bit curveballish, Kingsbrook would step in and answer those on my behalf, so that I wasn't thrown and that the potential buyer got a good answer to the question. The involvement of Kingsbrook obviously wasn't just in the meetings, it was there in the background the entire time that the deal was happening. So we had lawyers, we had accountants, but the Kingsbrook advisor really was like our best friend, so to speak, hand-holding us through the entire process. So, for example, everyone will relate to waking up in the night with a random thought about something that perhaps hadn't been discussed, and it would be Kingsbrook who would be the people I would go to on that, about how do we handle this and how do we put this forward to the buyer, for example. And the advice on those fronts was absolutely excellent. If I was to offer a piece of advice to organisations looking to sell, some very good advice I had when our business was a lot smaller was make sure that all your affairs are in order, so to speak, that everything is documented. And for example, we didn't have written staff contracts for everybody, and there were some records that weren't as good as they could have been. Even with that, even with the business really in order for that sort of thing, it was still, well, the hardest part of the process was the due diligence and the being able to produce all of the records and all of the information that the buyer wanted. So even with everything at easy access, still producing that was a huge task. Absolutely. I can't remember a time when I've had to work as hard as that in terms of pulling all that together. But again, having Kingsbrook alongside helping with that, and in some cases pushing back and saying to the buyer, look, is this really necessary, this particular thing that you've asked for, because it is such a remote thing from the dim and distant past? And to actually have that advice as to balance, I found very helpful. The project is a stressful exercise. I did enjoy it because I learned a lot from it, and I do derive a lot of pleasure from learning new things. I think there's a sense of relief when the deal was completed, but what was the most enjoyable part? I think, to be honest, it was working with a group of people I regarded as a team, the lawyers, the accountants and Kingsbrook, and actually really having good working relationships together. And that obviously is very, very important. If you get on well with the people who are advising you, you can have frank discussions, and frank discussions, let's face it, are important with this. So in terms of life after the sale, one of the single biggest benefits which I had not expected was a couple of weeks after the deal had concluded, waking up in the morning and realising that I did not have all of the thought space to do with running a business occupied with running a business. It wasn't there anymore, and the sense of relief or understanding that came with that was way above the sense of relief at actually completing the deal. And so it's one of those things that you don't realise, or I didn't realise, just how much headspace running a business took up, because it just builds up year on year. It just builds up and you just don't notice it until it isn't there anymore. For all of the shareholders, it was important that we did have a plan post-acquisition as well, because I can see that something that's been a major part of someone's life stopping suddenly is quite an impact. And so for all of us, we had plans that we are now progressing post-sale. I would have absolutely no hesitation in recommending Kingsbrook at all, and I'm not being paid to say that.